and welcome to today's episode brought to you by Holy Reads, the world's first Christian book summary app. With Holy Reads, you can discover more powerful insights and summaries from 1,000 plus Christian books in under 20 minutes, whether you want to read or listen. I'm your host, Michael, and today we're exploring The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. This book takes a deep dive into one of the most challenging aspects of faith, understanding pain and suffering in a world created by a good and loving God. Lewis, with his unique blend of intellect and faith, guides us to see how suffering can have meaning, even if it doesn't remove the sting of pain. Lewis begins by acknowledging the difficulty of the question, why pain? He argues that pain becomes a problem specifically for those who believe in a good and moral universe. If the world is governed by a loving God, how do we explain the presence of suffering, both physical and emotional? He points out that human beings naturally feel that the universe should be good because we are wired with a moral sense, an inherent belief that some things are right and others are wrong. The existence of pain and evil seems to contradict this belief, but Lewis invites us to think of pain not as a contradiction, but as a part of the bigger mystery of faith. If we believe in God's goodness, we must also trust that there is a purpose we may not fully comprehend. One of Lewis's core arguments is that free will is essential to understanding pain. God created beings with the ability to choose between good and evil. Without this freedom, there would be no meaningful relationship with God. However, this freedom also opens the door to suffering. According to Lewis, the world's natural order, with its physical laws, creates an environment where actions have consequences. A fire can provide warmth or cause harm. A flood can sustain crops or destroy homes. This natural order is necessary for free will to have real meaning. Without it, our choices would have no significance, and life would be devoid of genuine growth or moral development. Lewis also addresses the question of God's omnipotence. He clarifies that omnipotence doesn't mean God can do the logically impossible, like creating free will and then forcing creatures to use it only for good. True freedom involves risk. God, in his omnipotence, allows human beings the choice to turn away from him, even if it leads to pain. This perspective on omnipotence is vital for understanding suffering. It shows that God's power is not about control, but about honoring the gift of free will. Lewis reminds us that God's purpose isn't to create a world of robots, but a world where beings freely choose love, truth, and goodness. In this framework, pain becomes a result of the meaningful, albeit sometimes tragic, choices made by free creatures. For many, the hardest part of accepting suffering is reconciling it with the concept of a loving God. Lewis explains that divine love is not the same as human love, it's deeper and more complex. God's love is not about giving us comfort and ease, as a human parent might. Instead, it's about forming us into beings capable of true goodness and joy. Lewis uses several analogies to illustrate this love. He compares God to a father, a teacher, and even a sculptor who must sometimes chisel away parts of a stone to reveal the masterpiece within. This process is painful, but it is done with the ultimate purpose of making us more like Christ. Just as a parent disciplines a child out of love, God allows us to experience hardships that ultimately shape and refine our character. Lewis doesn't shy away from acknowledging human wickedness as a contributing factor to pain. He argues that humans often underestimate their sinfulness. We are quick to see ourselves as decent or moral, but Lewis reminds us that each of us falls short of God's standard. In the story of the fall, humans use their free will to turn away from God, setting in motion a world affected by sin. Lewis suggests that the consequences of this choice reverberate throughout creation, impacting not only humanity but the natural world as well. This brokenness is not a direct punishment, but rather a natural consequence of a world that has chosen separation from God. Recognizing our role in the existence of pain helps us see it not as an arbitrary curse, but as part of the human story. One of Lewis's central ideas is that pain can be a catalyst for spiritual growth. He describes it as a megaphone that God uses to awaken us to our need for Him. When life is easy, we often become self-sufficient, forgetting our dependence on God. Pain breaks through this illusion, reminding us of our need for divine support. This doesn't mean that God inflicts pain on us, but rather that He uses it to turn our hearts toward Him. Through suffering, we are stripped of our pride and learn humility, patience, and compassion. Lewis calls this process soul-making. It's a difficult journey, but it's through pain that we become more Christ-like, embodying the love, resilience, and mercy that are central to the Christian faith. The example of Christ is pivotal in understanding the Christian view of suffering. Jesus, who was without sin, endured immense suffering, betrayal, physical pain, and ultimately death on the cross. His experience teaches us that suffering isn't a punishment for sin, but sometimes a path that even the most righteous must walk. Lewis argues that Christ's suffering sanctifies our own, giving it redemptive value. By participating in Christ's suffering, we draw closer to Him, sharing in both His pain and His resurrection. This participation transforms suffering from something meaningless into a pathway to deeper intimacy with God. Christ's life shows us that suffering, when embraced with faith, can lead to profound spiritual renewal. One of the most hopeful aspects of the problem of pain is Lewis's view of heaven. He explains that the Christian doctrine of heaven provides a final answer to pain. Earthly suffering is temporary, but the joy of heaven is eternal. Heaven offers a state of being where all pain is redeemed and every tear is wiped away. Lewis uses the analogy of a seed that must die to bring forth new life. Our earthly experiences, especially our sufferings, are part of a transformation process. In heaven, we will see that the pain we endured served a greater purpose, helping us to become the people God intended us to be. This hope doesn't remove the reality of suffering, but it provides a perspective that allows us to endure with faith. Lewis doesn't avoid the topic of hell, which he describes as the horrible freedom of rejecting God. Hell, he argues, is not a place created by God to torment people, but a state of self-imposed separation from Him. It is the result of a soul that chooses independence from God's love. For Lewis, hell is a necessary consequence of free will. God respects human choice, even if it means some will ultimately reject Him, but He reassures us that hell is not something God desires for anyone. It is the tragic end for those who refuse to surrender their pride. This perspective on hell challenges us to see our choices as deeply significant, shaping our eternal destiny. Lewis also addresses a challenging question: the suffering of animals. Since animals don't have moral agency, their pain raises difficult questions about God's goodness. Lewis suggests that animal suffering may be linked to the larger brokenness of creation, a result of humanity's fall and the influence of sin on the natural world. He admits that there are no easy answers to this mystery, but he believes that animals, like humans, have a place in God's plan for redemption. This discussion invites us to approach the problem of pain with humility, recognizing that some aspects of God's plan are beyond human understanding. It reminds us that our faith involves trust, even when we lack complete explanations. Thank you for joining us in exploring the problem of pain by C.S. Lewis. His reflections on suffering remind us that pain, though difficult, can draw us closer to God, shaping us into the people He created us to be. This book doesn't offer simple answers, but invites us to engage deeply with our faith, finding meaning in our trials. This podcast was brought to you by Holy Reads, the world's first Christian book summary app. If you enjoyed this episode, download Holy Reads to discover more powerful insights and summaries from 1,000+ Christian books. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more reflections and book summaries to guide your faith journey. Until next time, may you find strength and purpose in life's challenges, trusting in God's love through every season.